listen, it reads like a trashy novel. Like if you're a soap opera person, you're gonna dig this. But there are 4 main people that you're gonna need to know as I talk through this. One is obviously Esther, who's a Jewish girl in captivity, happened to be an orphan, and so she's being raised by Mordecai, her cousin, right? So you got Mordecai, raised in Esther, they're both Jews, and they're in Susa, capital city of Persia, so they're in exile together. You're also gonna need to know King Ahasuerus. I will never say that again, I'll just say king, but you're gonna need to know him. He was a bit of a drinker, kind of impulsive, kind of angry, not the best dude out there. And then you're gonna have to know a man named Haman, who was just an official in the king's government, right? So at the beginning of the story, what we see is that this king is having a party with all his buddies, and his wife, Queen Vashti, well known for her beauty. And so he summons her to come to the party basically so he can show her off to his friends, and she refuses to come. And it tells us that he's been drinking a little bit, and he gets really angry, and he signs a bunch of decrees like, men need to control their women. Like he's that dude, right? But the thing he does that affects the whole story is that he strips her of her crown. So he takes away Queen Vashti's crown, she's no longer queen, and he decides that he is going to search all of the young, of marrying age, beautiful women in the kingdom and find himself a new wife. And Esther fits into this category, right? So she kind of gets swept up in this whole thing with all of these other women, but Mordecai gives her a little bit of a warning beforehand and says, listen, don't tell them that you're a Jew, right? Keep that to yourself. And so she does, she gets swept up, and over the course of the next year, she wins the king's favor. And ultimately, she ends up becoming the queen, right? She kind of wins the crown, for lack of a better way to put it. Now, remember, Mordecai raised her. So even though they may not be father-daughter, that's the relationship. And she spent the better part of a year with the king. So Mordecai is spending a lot of time hanging out at the king's gate because Esther is in there. And it just so happens that one of the days he happens to overhear 2 of the king's guardsmen plotting against the king. And so he tells Esther, because Esther's got inroads with the king, and Esther goes and says, hey, listen, Mordecai told me that this thing is gonna happen. They have a big investigation. They find the guards, they kick them out. It's a whole dramatic thing. It gets recorded in the royal recordings. And Mordecai kind of saves the king in that moment. Now, this is where we meet Haman. They don't give us a lot of backstory on Haman. Basically, the first thing you find out about him is that he's elevated to almost the place of a number 2 in the kingdom, and he's all puffed up on himself. And so he's walking around with his new position and title, making people bow down and subjugate to him. Now, remember, Mordecai hangs out at the king's gate all the time, so it was really a matter of time before Haman runs into Mordecai. He's got no idea of the relation with Esther, but he runs into Mordecai, and scripture tells us that Mordecai refuses to bow down and subjugate himself to Haman. Scripture itself does not tell us why. I could draw some assumptions, being one of God's people, that he wouldn't want to do that, but that's not what scripture tells us. It just tells us that he refuses to bow down, and Haman is furious. Who's this guy, this Jew no less, who is not gonna bow down to me? And he goes off forming a plot against Mordecai. Now, Haman's kind of a snake, like he's one of those people, and those people typically aren't real good at face-to-face, like man-to-man stuff. And so he convinces the king, who is easily convincible in this story, to sign a decree that allows for a genocide of all of the Jewish people. So all the Jewish people are going to be killed, which will include Mordecai. And then Haman never has to do that one-on-one thing. Now, Mordecai finds out all his people are about to be slaughtered. And so he goes to Queen Esther and says, listen, your husband just signed this thing into law. You got to talk to him, right? You got to go speak on behalf of your people. But for Esther, number 1, she would have to then reveal that she concealed something from the king. And we already know that this king is not the most even-tempered of individuals and has a history of doing hurtful and impulsive things. And the second thing you need to know is that legally speaking, to enter the king's presence and address something without being invited by the king has the legal right to have you killed. And so Esther having to weigh this thing out is real, like it's a big deal. But she lets her love for her people come first. And so she says, okay, listen, I'm gonna fast she says, to Mordecai, grab all the Jews and have them fast for 3 days and 3 nights, right? No eating, no drinking, nothing. Now it does say they fast. It doesn't say anything about prayer or fasting to God. It just says that they fast. And so she said, I'll do the same with all of my friends in the palace, like we'll fast. And at the end of the 3 days, I'll go to the king and I'll talk to him. And if I die, I die. But I have to, right? Because those are my people. And so she decides that the best way for her to be able to do this is to invite both the king and Haman to a banquet, like kind of butter them up, make them feel good about themselves, cook some good food, serve them right. And so she invites just those two to 2 banquets. And so they go to this first banquet, and Haman is feeling pretty good about himself again because nobody but him is at dinner with the king and the queen. Like, he must be an important guy. And so they have the first banquet, and then it tells us that the king, after that banquet, goes back to his chambers. Maybe he's having trouble sleeping, I don't know, but he didn't have Netflix or Hulu or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus or whatever, right? So he has the royal records. So he calls someone to bring the royal records and read them to him. And as he's listening to them, he is reminded of what Mordecai did. And he's like, hey, what did we do for that guy anyway? Like, that was pretty awesome. What did we do to honor Mordecai? And the servant who's reading it is like, nothing. We didn't do anything. He says, well, we got to do something about that. Cut to the next scene. At the same time, Haman leaves the banquet, runs across Mordecai again, because Mordecai's hanging at the king's gate. Again, Mordecai won't bow down to him. And again, he's infuriated. But this time, he's like ready to go directly at Mordecai. So he has this huge gallows built specifically to kill Mordecai. And then he returns to talk to the king again about this whole plan. And this is where it's like, it doesn't get more soap opera than this. But so he returns to talk to the king. And in the king's mind, he's only thinking about Mordecai and this great stuff that Mordecai had done. But Haman is only thinking about how great he is and how awful Mordecai is. So Haman walks in, and as soon as he walks in, the king asks Haman, what should we do for someone that the king delights in? Like a man that the king delights in, how should we treat him? Haman assumes the king is talking about him. And he's like, well, we should dress him in robes, and we should parade him around and make sure he's honored. And the king's like, okay, done. So go get Mordecai and dress him. And so literally, Haman, like complete reversal, the very thing that Mordecai wouldn't do for Haman that made him so mad, Haman is now forced to do for Mordecai, right? It's nuts. So carry on a little bit in the story, we get to the second time that they come together for this banquet, and this is like the big scene. This is where Esther is gonna lay it all on the table and admit that she's a Jew and that there's this plot, and it was Haman that did it. And Haman has to be feeling a little some kind of way at this point. But if you kind of picture just the 3 of them hanging out, and Esther says all this stuff, and then the angry, drunk king, who's been known to do some nasty things, gets up and storms out to the royal gardens, presumably to collect his thoughts. And at the exact moment that he returns, Haman happens to fall on the couch next to Esther. Now, nothing in Scripture indicates that there was actually something nefarious going on at that time, but that's what the king walks into, and that's what he sees, and then it's a done deal. And he literally has Haman hanged on the gallows that he built to kill Mordecai. It is a full circle reversal of everything that's happening, but we've still got the problem that Jewish genocide is impending. So Mordecai, having been raised up to the rank of number 2, sits with the king and issues another decree that essentially stops it from happening. It prevents the genocide. And not only that, but the way it all plays out, there are people like Persians in their capital after this all plays out that start calling themselves Jews. So there is a total reversal of fortune for even the Jewish people who are slaves at the beginning of the story. Then they're set to be slaughtered, and now there's people pretending to be them, and we see the story close with a record that Mordecai is again acting as second in command and doing a phenomenal job. Like, everybody loves what he's doing, and it's terrific. So nowhere in this entire story was there the word even, God, Yahweh, Lord, like none of that. But when you take a step back and you actually look at what really happened, there's no way God wasn't a part of that. I mean, the number of incredibly improbable, unlikely things that would have had to happen for it to play out that way, it had to be God.